Okay, this is part two of the context of learning, and I want to focus on differentiation here because really differentiation is about really figuring out who your students are and developing ways that you're able to reach them with your teaching methods. And the way that we think about differentiation is that we're considering both the differences and the similarities among our students in the classroom, so that we can group our students, so that we can really hone in on their needs and also their assets. There are four main areas that we typically think about with differentiation, and we do this based upon student readiness, students' interests, or student learning profile, and I'll go into that in just a minute. First of all, one of the things that is probably most easily recognized is differentiation based on the content. And content is really what the student needs to learn, and how they're going to get access to that information. And so we can modify the level of the difficulty level. We can modify the language. We can modify the types of interests that are involved in the content. We can also modify number two here, the process. So these are the activities that we use to help our students engage with the content and make sense of the content. So for example, I want to go back to content and then swing over to process. So with content, one of the things that's become really quite prominent in I would not quite K-12 learning, but really more upper elementary through high school, is personalized learning. And this is where the teacher would bring in a topic, bring in an academic standard that the students need to work on. And oftentimes there would be a computer-based program that the students would work through, that's set at their specific level. And then they can progress through learning different concepts, and they progress at their own pace. And the difficulty level is increased as the students go through the program. So that's one way that the content and also the process can be very different. One of the things that we're also seeing a lot of in across K-12 education is the use of projects, project-based learning, problem-based learning, challenge-based learning, inquiry. And in these teaching models, the teacher brings to the students either a question, a problem, a high interest topic, and presents a little bit of information. It's called backgrounding. The background give the students a little bit of knowledge, just enough so that students are able to stay engaged and stay interested. And then they have multiple ways for the students to explore more deeply different aspects of the content. And so there may be stations set up around the room that students can pick and choose which ones they want to go to to explore different aspects of the content. Other teachers may have different modalities of content that they're providing to students. So sometimes, when you have a student who's, let's say, for example, dyslexic, you may have some learning materials that are video based or podcast, whereas other students who are really, they really achieve well and learn well with traditional black and white text. You have traditional texts for them. So in that way, you can modify or differentiate that the process of acquiring the content based on the student's needs. Also, the products that students are asked to engage in or work on as they're learning the content, that can be varied based on your students. So, and again, projects work really well here. And, you'll have some students who want to do a really deep dive into a topic, and so you can have extra learning materials available for those students. You may have some students who just really are ready to cover the basics, and in order to assess their learning, you would want to have different outcomes that they would show for the learning that they're doing there. And as I pointed out previously, the learning environment is also something that we can vary up in order to meet the needs of our students. And so I love the way this is said here. It's the learning environment is the way the classroom works and feels. It's not just necessarily the way it looks, but this is really about creating a learning community and creating that safe learning environment. And it's the processes, and it's the way people treat each other, and it's the way work is done, and what is valued. Is the creation of knowledge valued in the classroom? Is this a place where it's okay to make mistakes? Is this a place where it's actually encouraged to make mistakes? Is this a place where practice is encouraged? Or is this a place where the only thing that's valued is that final paper that's written at the end, or the final piece of art that's created that's perfect? Is it the place where the paragraph that needs to be written, that's going to be hung up in the hallway, is completely perfect? There's no letters that are misshapen. There's nothing misspelled. Or is it a place that we value the iterations that it takes to do the learning that produce that really high quality outcome? Which is it? Anyways. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the learning profile, because this is really where all of that information is contained. And more and more schools are developing learning profiles for their students, and so sometimes they're called data backpacks as well. So really, this is a collection of information and data about the student, and these really vary by district, by school, and by grade level. Some examples of things that you may see in a learning profile include like demographic information, family information, very specific information on, mother, father, siblings, next of kin, relatives, parent, guardian, all of that sort of a thing. IEP, accommodations, modifications, descriptions of learning preferences. So this may include some description of personalized learning and their preferences for personalized learning and outcomes that have been achieved. More of an analysis of their learning preferences. Notice I didn't say learning styles, because learning styles aren't scientifically proven to be a thing. Those of you who are going to have Scott Peters down the road, just ask him about that. But anyway, so an analysis of learning preferences, motivators, interests, also the quantitative sorts of data that you would absolutely expect, things like grades, standardized testing, other assessment data. There may be a portfolio with artifacts that have been collected on different projects, different like art projects. There could even be some digital and music that they've done. Any achievements, artistic or athletic or extracurricular, those might be in there. Attendance, behavior records, career planning information, and more and more we're seeing that these learning profiles also include records of their parents' fee payments and the teacher-facing information or the administration-facing information may have information on parental communications and homeschool correspondence and things like that. I've included a link here to a description of a digital or the data backpack that's being used in a school district here. Just thought you might find it interesting. Okay, so the kinds of things that you should know and you want to make sure that you note in your records is the student, what you have seen from learning profile or other data on their intellectual, emotional, or physical ability to perform to meet the expectations of the course. And so you really need to be mindful of that. It's not just the intellectual or physical ability, it's also the emotional ability to perform to meet the expectations of the course. Oftentimes, we don't even think about what is the emotional ability required to meet the expectations, right? Also want to be thinking about the level of work that you're going to be assigning with a lesson or a unit, and whether or not it falls within their ZPD or not. Yep, that's an ed psych term. If you don't remember it, you need to look it up. Then their beliefs about and ability to participate as a member of the class as a community of learners. And so this is something that, at the beginning of the school year, many teachers really spend some time working on developing what is meant by being a member of this community, and by talking about, their culture, what they've experienced, what they know about being a member of a community, what social characteristics are valued, what communication preferences are valued. And one of the questions that I oftentimes ask my future teachers is, what do you mean by respect? And how do you believe respect is shown? And I want you to think about how respect is shown in different cultures. And respect and how it's shown, how it's demonstrated, how it's practiced can really vary from culture to culture, but also from classroom to classroom. So it's a really important conversation to have with your students. You also want to make sure that you're jotting down anything that you can learn about what motivates them, what kinds of things, get them really engaged in the learning that's happening. They're really normative behavior of persistence. So do they have a lot of resilience? Do you notice a lot of self-efficacy? Where? Then this is where, we really bring in culturally relevant teaching. And this is also where we bring in a lot of their interests, their preferences, and their motivators. So, building on culturally relevant teaching, I want to say, yes, I know y'all have developed a lot of awareness about, where the intersectionality of schooling and, poverty, social class, race, gender, identity, and that. But poverty, social class, race, those were really superficially mentioned in your previous work. And I noticed that culture and culturally relevant teaching was really not brought in, and really wasn't brought in as at all as an asset. And one of the very common strategies, and it's a fine one, that I saw with bringing culture into the classroom was really decor. And we've got to go beyond. We've got to go beyond decor. So I've asked you to watch the videos on culturally responsive teaching, and I want you to go back to those character sketches and see if there was anything that you missed concerning culturally relevant teaching. And so when you reflect back on the character sketches in the classroom simulation and some of the things that you wrote, first of all, I don't want anybody to think that they did it wrong or they didn't do enough or anything like that. That's not the case. I asked you to do the assignment to see where you were at so that I could provide the additional information that you needed. And so what I want to end this with is that when we're thinking about culturally relevant teaching, we need to move beyond food and flags. We've got to do more than, have a holiday or, celebrate historical accomplishments. And no, Taco Tuesdays is not an example of culturally relevant teaching. Oh my good God. Yep. Yeah. So what I want you to think about is, this doesn't necessarily have to be about race. I want you to think about what's meaningful to the student. What does the student value about their cultural background? Okay. So it's important to also know, what is the student's cultural background? Don't make assumptions here. Build rapport with the student. Learn how they identify before moving to identifying assets or celebrating, or however you want to describe it. some students who, like, for example, the student that I had previously, who was biracial, African American, Hispanic. He self-identified as African. For many years, he only identified as African American. For another several years, he only identified as Hispanic. Brief window, he identified as African. Identity and culture can be very fluid. So it's really important that before you move into, just bringing culture in, you need to know who your students are. You need to know who that kid is. You need to know what they think and how they feel. I also want to encourage you to use a great deal of caution when you're talking about family of origin. And, things like adoption, blended families, family dynamics. Please don't do activities that cause students to have to diagram their family tree. And please don't ask them to talk about, where they're from, or, where did your family immigrate from? Because, for some of us, that's a really loaded issue. People who are adopted, start asking questions about, well, what nationality are you? You can be opening up some pretty deep wounds. So just be really careful there. And if you're going to start talking about family origin, family trees, all of that sort of thing, make sure you know who your students are, and make sure you've got some really strong learning objectives that require you to do just that, and there's no other way to go about it. Also, as I said, culturally relevant teaching, not always about race, ethnic background. It's about core identities. It's about what the students see as their assets. So for some of our students, LGBT, gender, those could be the most prominent core identities that need to be brought to the forefront, celebrated as assets. Body positivity. Many of our students who are dealing with body size issues, a core identity, learning body positivity and size acceptance, oh my goodness, that could go a long way. And many of us can completely relate to students whose core identities revolve around being a musician, a gamer, an athlete, any of those things. So I don't want you to shy away from culturally relevant teaching because you think that it's all about bringing race into the classroom. And race is, it's great to bring race into the classroom, and just as was discussed in those videos. However, I just want to let you know that there are some other perspectives that we can bring in here as well. And there are other identities that students need to have brought to the forefront and cherished as a treasure, as an asset, just as was discussed in the videos.